He threw cold water on the homeless man, not knowing that man wasn't who he thought he was. The arrogant millionaire, Cole Harrington, with an empire built on contempt, didn't know that this humiliating gesture would turn his world upside down. And you, will you believe what comes next is a simple accident or something much deeper? The fate of the man he despised is more intertwined with his own than he ever imagined. And worse, the truth was there all along, right under his nose. Don't miss what happens when the masks fall and he discovers the impact of his gesture in the place he least expected. The freezing morning in Manhattan swallowed the city with its usual rush, like a hungry lion devouring everything around it. The streets were busy, cars speeding between traffic lights and pedestrians marching hurriedly, ignoring the few signs of life that dared to show themselves in the cold landscape. Cole Harrington, unlike the city, was never rushed. He was used to controlling time, having everything in his hands with the precision of a master watchmaker. The golden watch on his wrist seemed to run faster than anything around him, and he liked that. He liked the control he had over his world, over his company, over his empire. Everything was perfect, or at least, it should be. Until that moment, the gleaming glass building of Harrington Enterprises dominated the landscape, reflecting sunlight in an imposing, almost arrogant way, as if it had the right to challenge the sky. Cole loved looking at his empire from that window. Nothing in Manhattan, and certainly nothing in that busy neighborhood, seemed bigger or more imposing. He always felt superior, as if the city were his. It was, after all, his game, his rules. But that morning, the street challenged that feeling of absolute power. Next to the building, sleeping on the cold sidewalk, was Eli Walker, a dirty man with disheveled hair and a thick beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. His clothes, a worn-out coat and threadbare pants, seemed to be an extension of the sidewalk on which he lay. He appeared to be nothing more than a vagrant, a shadow among the ruins of a society that had turned its back on him, a forgotten figure. But the moment Cole Harrington's eyes met Eli's, everything changed. The millionaire stopped in front of his company's door, his eyes fixed on the man lying there. A look of deep contempt crossed his face, like a sharp blade cutting through the silence. To Cole, what he saw there was nothing more than a nuisance, an obstacle, a problem to be solved. He had always believed the world should work his way. Whoever challenged him, whoever occupied public space without the permission of the powerful, deserved to be erased, in a way. With the abrupt movement and without thinking, Cole approached Eli. He wasn't there to reflect or ponder what he was doing. He just wanted to clean the entrance to his company, leave his space clean so his employees and clients wouldn't be confronted with the filth that the street brought. The gesture wasn't thought out, it was instinctive. With a quick movement, Cole grabbed the bucket that was in the hand of an employee cleaning the building and threw it over the sleeping man. The cold, dirty water splashed over Eli, soaking his clothes and waking him abruptly. He got up with a confused expression, trying to understand what was happening, but not defending himself, not cursing, not raising his voice. The water ran down Eli's face, and he remained silent. The sound of the emptying bucket was the only thing that disturbed the morning's quietness. People began to stop and look, but none of them dared to intervene. The street, known for its indifference, watched like a distant spectator, as if this were a common scene, nothing more than the city's day-to-day life. Cole stood there, staring at Eli. He expected the man to react. Scream, maybe. To despise him back with cutting words, with a look of fury. But what he saw in Eli was a disconcerting calmness, almost strange. Eli simply got up, adjusted his coat, and looked at Cole. There was no word, no emotional response. There was no anger, no contempt. There was only a silence that weighed more than any scream. It was a disturbing moment for Cole. He stood there for a few seconds, looking at the man he had just humiliated publicly, waiting for a reaction, a justification for what he had just done. But nothing. Just silence. Just Eli's gaze, now more distant and enigmatic than ever. The millionaire then, not knowing what to do, rushed into the building. He had an important meeting, perhaps the most important of his career. His heart was beating faster now, but not because of what he had just done. He was in a hurry, feeling that time was pressing him as always. But something was different. Something inside him was restless. The gesture that seemed so simple, so justified in his mind, now seemed wrong. But he didn't know how or why. As Cole entered the building, Eli was still there, standing on the sidewalk. He didn't move, wasn't running away, wasn't asking for anything. He just remained in his place, watching the city around him. It was as if the sidewalk were his only possession, his only domain. The rest of the world seemed distant, but at the same time, he was there, present. The water Cole threw on him in the end made no difference. As the door closed behind Cole, he didn't know that this simple moment of humiliation for Eli would be the trigger for something he could never imagine. What he didn't know, what he would never understand in that instant, was that this gesture of contempt would trigger a reaction that would change everything. The cold water still dripped from Eli's clothes, and the city, like a silent witness, continued to move around the scene. The Manhattan sidewalk, the beating heart of a financial empire, would never be the same again. For Eli, however, nothing had changed. He remained in his place as if immune to the turbulence around him, while Cole's impact was about to reverberate throughout the city and beyond. The scene didn't take long to be recorded. First, it was a photograph taken by a hesitant intern, the kind of photo no one would imagine would have the power to transform an ordinary morning into a global event. The intern, who was on his way to get coffee, hesitated for a moment when he saw what was happening before his eyes. The idea of sharing the image crossed his mind, but like everyone else around him, he was immersed in the idea of doing nothing. However, his fingers were faster than his mind. The click was instantaneous, and the image of Cole throwing water on Eli was posted on his Instagram account, not knowing how viral it would become. What seemed to be a simple act of a millionaire controlling a social problem quickly transformed into a public nightmare. Within hours, the video was reposted, shared, retweeted, with thousands of people commenting. A wave of indignation spread throughout the city and country. The impression of abuse of power, fueled by the coldness of Cole's gesture, touched a sensitive nerve in many people. What seemed to be an act of contempt became a symbol of all the system's abuses. The phrase everyone began to repeat was simple: dignity is not disposable. The media, eager for any story with the potential to generate clicks, didn't take long to do their part. Headlines began to appear with unbeatable speed. Millionaire throws cold water on homeless man. Wealth and indifference. A billionaire expels dignity with a simple bucket. Contempt on the streets. A man and an empire collide. Within 24 hours, the photo of Eli and Cole, now transformed into a symbol, had already reached millions of views. Indignation took over social media, and in an almost organic movement, people began to express their own experiences with the system, with social neglect, with the inequalities that, in the end, generated situations like Eli's. People who had never paid attention to what happened on the streets began to question their own attitudes and their own privileges. Meanwhile, Eli wasn't the least bit concerned with the discussions that simmered around him. For him, the street was his space, and the bucket of water Cole threw at him didn't change him. He continued his silent routine as he always had. However, as the story spread, he found himself somehow being transformed into an icon. He had become the face of something bigger than he could understand at the moment. He was now, in the eyes of many people, the symbol of resistance, someone who faced the city's oppression in a silent but firm way. Meanwhile, Cole couldn't escape the tide of pressures that were accumulating. It was no longer just a matter of a viral photo. The reactions began to take other forms. Calls from investors, image consultants insisting on reparation moves, and even his own board of directors wanting a public position to appease the situation. Cole's PR was in a frenzy. He tried to find a way to put out the fire, but the more he tried, the more the fire spread. For him, the problem wasn't the gesture itself, but what it had provoked: a public image crisis. The first step to try to control the situation was, unsurprisingly, a mass donation to a nonprofit charity. The media was already beginning to speculate about a donation movement from Cole to try to clean up his image. The problem was that people weren't buying the idea of an altruistic action. For them, the donations were a simple trick to divert attention. Criticism continued, and what Cole didn't understand was what was really at stake. It wasn't about his momentary actions, but about a deep disconnect between his world and the world of everyone around him. While Cole desperately tried to change the narrative, Eli continued to be the silent spectator, watching the movements around him with the serenity of someone who had already seen much more in his life than what a rushed city could offer. He walked through Manhattan as if the city were his, but also as if he didn't care about it. He didn't need justifications, recognition. Public recognition wasn't something he sought. He had something much more important: his own dignity. The following Monday, the impact of Cole's gesture extended to the coffee tables of Manhattan's most powerful businessmen. Some talked about it in a mocking tone, others in contempt, but there was an invisible tension in the air, something deeper that no one wanted to admit. The city of Manhattan, which had always prided itself on being the center of financial power, now faced a values crisis, and all the money in the world couldn't erase what had been done. For Eli, however, nothing changed. He remained there, just another character in the immense scenery of a city that never cared. But there was a quietness in him, a peace that Cole would never understand. And as the story continued to spread, he was slowly recognized by more and more people as someone important. But who really was Eli Walker? What was his true story? And how was he, somehow, now connected to Cole Harrington in a way no one could imagine? Cole Harrington, unlike the city that never sleeps, was awake more than ever, but not because of his own desire. He was trapped in a spiral of anxiety, something he had never felt before. The golden watch on his wrist, which always symbolized control and power, now seemed heavy, as if marking the rhythm of an imminent crisis. He couldn't sleep, and every time he closed his eyes, the sound of the water bucket hitting the ground, along with Eli's unperturbed look, repeated in his mind like an out-of-tune song. The city, on the other hand, seemed to continue its unperturbed routine. People were busy with their lives, their shopping, their business. But for Cole, reality was different. He couldn't escape the pressure of an incident that, at first, seemed to be just a slip. However, the more he tried to push it from his mind, the more he found himself trapped by the act of contempt he had committed. His empire was at stake. And more than that, his public image, his reputation as a successful businessman, as someone who dominated every aspect of his life, was being questioned. It was no longer a matter of being a good businessman. Now, what he represented, what he was in the public's eyes, was at stake. The gesture he judged simple and insignificant was reverberating in ways he never imagined. Image consultants began to appear, one after another. They were hand in hand with the fear Cole didn't want to admit. Image was everything. What he did within the corridors of his company no longer mattered. What was really at stake was how he would be seen. They suggested a series of actions to clean up Cole's image, trying to minimize the impact of public humiliation, more donations, interviews, even a public apology campaign. But Cole was tired. Apology words never seemed sincere. The consultants knew that such a gross action as he had committed couldn't be erased with empty words. However, nothing more could be done without concrete action. Money, the element that had always dominated his world, now became just a useless bargaining chip in the face of what he had done. Sitting in his leather chair in his glass office, Cole looked at his computer screens, full of emails and messages from consultants talking about symbolic gestures and corrective actions. He was already exhausted from all the facade. The weight of responsibility was already felt in every fiber of his body. He knew people wouldn't settle for a simple donation. He knew Eli's dignity couldn't be bought. But still, he tried to rationalize, trying to find an easy way out. Cole decided the best way to deal with this would be to neutralize the problem. He could try to manipulate the narrative and focus on the story of the philanthropic act, something grand enough to stifle people's anger. He even thought about turning the situation into a branding opportunity, something that would increase his popularity as someone committed to social justice. He imagined himself giving an interview where he would talk about his commitment to improving living conditions for the most needy, perhaps even sponsoring temporary shelters for people in situations like Eli's. He could create a foundation, write a huge check, and give a statement with all the cliches the public wanted to hear. After all, this would give the impression that he was trying to correct a mistake, which was actually a simple misunderstanding. But there was something inside him that couldn't free itself from the feeling of emptiness. It wasn't just an image crisis. The real question went deeper. Why did that gesture of contempt seem not to go away? Why did he, who always dominated situations, now feel powerless in the face of something as simple as one person's reaction? He couldn't understand what was happening to him. Something he had never questioned before was beginning to lose meaning. The power of absolute control. To complicate matters further, social pressure only increased. Renowned journalists began to write articles about the incident, analyzing it from all possible perspectives. Some saw it as a metaphor for the disconnect between the rich and the poor. Others saw it as a reflection of the powerful's lack of empathy. What at first seemed to be just a fleeting news story was now beginning to become a phenomenon, with hashtags and campaigns being created in defense of the rights of the most humble. Cole's next step seemed obvious. A large donation, a public act of reconciliation, maybe even a public visit to a homeless shelter where he could show he was sorry for his attitude. He could hire an image consulting firm to help him set up the best strategy. But when he looked at the mirror in his office, something didn't fit. No matter how much he tried to change his image, there was something inside him that wasn't right. It was when, during an emergency meeting with his image department, Cole heard a phrase that made him stop in time. One of his advisors, older and more experienced than the others, said, "Cole, you can spend millions on image campaigns, but the question that really matters is, who are you now?" These words echoed in his mind like an alarm. He didn't know how to answer, but something inside him, something deep and rooted, was changing. Doubt began to consume Cole. The image he worked so hard to build and maintain was beginning to crumble. He no longer knew what was real or not. He found himself trapped in a web of false promises, trying to deceive the world and himself. What he didn't know was that the only way out of that crisis was to face the truth, a truth that even he wasn't ready to accept. The passing days seemed to drag on for Cole Harrington, as if the city, with all its strength and energy, had ceased to exist around him. The pressure on his shoulders increased as the scandal unfolded. But it wasn't just the public's reaction that bothered him. It wasn't the media. It wasn't the journalists. Not even the occasional street protests. It was something deeper. The feeling of emptiness, of losing something vital, something he couldn't identify. Eli Walker, the homeless man he had humiliated, was still there, on the city's margins, like a specter that wouldn't leave him in peace. Eli didn't appear in the media. He didn't seek recognition, didn't shout for justice. He seemed untouchable, as if the humiliation of Cole's gesture were irrelevant to him. This disturbed Cole even more. He had imagined that after the water bucket, Eli would disappear, that he would hide in the street's darkness like a ghost never to be seen again. But Eli was always there, like a constant presence, silently watching from afar. It was during one of his busy afternoons when Cole was preparing for a meeting with his image consultants that he heard something that made him stop suddenly. A familiar voice. A voice he didn't immediately recognize, but that seemed to come from a distant corner of his memory. "You don't remember me, do you, Cole?" He turned, surprised. The voice wasn't from one of his advisors, nor from an assistant. It came from a man who was at his office door, Eli Walker. But it wasn't the same Eli. His appearance was different. He was clean, with a coat that looked new, and the look of desolation he used to have had been replaced by something more serious, more focused. Cole froze, his heart racing, as if a piece of his past had returned to haunt him. He looked at him, and for a moment didn't know what to say. The image of Eli, the homeless man, was engraved in his mind. But there, before him, there was something more, something he didn't recognize. Eli was different, but what really disconcerted him was what he knew about Cole, more than Cole wanted to admit. Eli approached calmly, without haste. He didn't seem to be there to fight, but to reveal something. something Cole wasn't prepared to hear. "I know what you're thinking, Cole," Eli said, with a calmness that was disconcerting. "You're seeing me now and trying to understand who I am. But you don't remember, do you? You don't remember where you met me." Cole's initial shock made him take a step back. He looked at Eli, trying to find some familiarity, but couldn't understand what was happening. He saw the man at his door, so different from everything he imagined about him. But at the same time, there was something strange, as if a turned page of his life had come back to confront him. Something he had forgotten, or perhaps tried to forget. "Eli, Cole began, not knowing how to continue. He was lost. "Do you remember the Harrington Foundation?" Eli asked with a smile that wasn't friendly but enigmatic. "I was a volunteer there, at the beginning, long before all this. I was the one who helped your mother." The word mother cut through the air like a blade. Cole blinked, feeling a growing pressure in his head. He remembered his mother, that woman who had founded the institution with so much love and care. But why was Eli there now talking about her? "I don't understand," Cole murmured, confused. You were a volunteer there?" "Yes, Cole," Eli replied with a deep sigh. "I was more than a volunteer. Your mother taught me a lot about what really matters. But unfortunately, what you seem to have forgotten or perhaps never learned is that we can't simply leave people aside, no matter where they are. Your mother believed in that. She believed in commitment to people regardless of their condition." Cole looked at Eli, his brain trying to process what he was saying. It was as if a key had been turned inside his mind, but the memory wasn't complete. He remembered his mother as someone who cared deeply about people, someone who always talked about justice and equality. But this foundation, which he considered just a means of giving charity to people, now presented itself to him in a completely different way. And Eli had been more than a street victim. He had been a defender of the cause, someone who shared his mother's ideal, someone Cole had never noticed. "You knew, didn't you," Eli continued, "that your mother's foundation still has a property contract with a clause that protects the rights of the most humble? And did you know that the building you work in now, this company you're so proud of, was initially founded to serve the community? But no one ever cared about that. No one remembers where it came from." The shock Cole felt was profound, deeper than any financial blow he had ever received. He didn't know this. He didn't know his mother's foundation had this type of clause, or that Eli had a fundamental role in it. Eli wasn't just a homeless man randomly thrown in Cole's path. He was someone deeply connected to the history of his own family. "And you didn't realize that your gesture," Eli said, now with a more serious tone, "wasn't just a mistake. It was a rupture with something your mother built, something you were destined to continue. We're not just talking about a simple water bucket, Cole. We're talking about a lost legacy." The air inside the boardroom was dense. Cole Harrington felt more nervous than he ever imagined. What began as a simple gesture of impatience had transformed into a sequence of events he couldn't control. He sat at the glass table, surrounded by his board members, all in silence, waiting. The kind of silence that weighs, that's like a storm about to break. The meeting, scheduled to discuss the company's future and specifically his public response to the crisis involving Eli, had become something much bigger than he expected. The pressure was becoming unbearable. As Cole observed the faces around him, his hands, which used to be firm and confident, were now trembling. He tried not to show the panic that was beginning to take over his body, but each breath seemed more difficult than the last. He knew Eli's words were in his head, like a distant echo, and he could no longer ignore them. It was no longer just a matter of public image. It wasn't just an excuse for the media. There was something deeper, something he was finally beginning to understand, and it scared him. "Mr. Harrington, we need to decide what to do now," said Margaret, the marketing director, with a voice that tried to maintain neutrality but didn't hide the tension. She looked directly at him, her eyes evaluating every reaction, every movement. The entire room was looking at Cole, waiting for him to make a decision. He knew the board of directors was evaluating him, not just as CEO, but as a man. And at that moment, he no longer knew who he was. "Margaret's right," said Ethan, the CFO, with a harder tone. "This incident could affect our market position. We can't simply wait for things to resolve themselves. We must take firm action, and quickly." He paused, letting the words sink into Cole's mind. "The donation to the charity is a step, but it's not enough. We need something more forceful, more visible." Cole felt the weight of these words. Part of him wanted to scream, to say he could no longer pretend everything was fine. He wanted them to understand it wasn't just a matter of image, that the problem went far beyond that. But he knew he couldn't speak. Not there, not now. He felt the growing pressure. Eli was being mentioned in every conversation, like a shadow that refused to go away. The room filled with a sense of urgency. Board members were discussing quick solutions, more donations, a public apology campaign, even a new social responsibility project. Each idea was more unsustainable than the last, as if they were trying to put duct tape on a crack that couldn't be repaired. It was then that the room door opened slowly. Everyone looked at the entrance, surprised by Eli Walker's appearance. He didn't look like the same man Cole had seen on the sidewalk weeks ago. He was clean, wearing a simple but dignified suit. His posture was imposing, and the way he entered the room made everyone watch him in silence. Without a word, Eli walked to the front of the room, standing there as if he were the center of all attention. Cole's first reaction was pure bewilderment. He didn't know how Eli had managed to get in there, or why he was there. But something inside him told him this moment was decisive. The tension in the room was palpable. It was as if time had stopped. "I have a proposal," Eli said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but loaded with an authority no one expected. He looked directly at Cole, his eyes fixed, as if all he needed to do was look at that man for the truth to emerge. "I'm not here to destroy your company, Cole. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to do what your mother began to do many years ago, when she founded this place." The room was in shock. No one knew what to say. What was Eli suggesting? What was his purpose? Cole felt his heart beat faster. He tried to maintain his composure, but the truth was beginning to fall on him like an unbearable weight. Eli wasn't just a homeless man, as he had initially believed. He was someone deeply connected to the history of the Harrington Foundation, something Cole had never considered. Eli wasn't there just to ask for apologies, to receive donations. He was there to restart the legacy. "You know your mother's contract, don't you, Cole?" Eli asked, looking directly at him. The foundation she started wasn't about charity. It was about commitment. The commitment to the most needy, to those who most needed help. She didn't leave the foundation to be transformed into a showcase of good deeds. She left it to be a reflection of human dignity. The silence that followed was heavy. Cole didn't know what to say. He wanted to scream, wanted to react. But something inside him said this wasn't a fight to be won with words. He had ignored his mother's mission. He had turned it into a tool for his own benefit, forgetting the real purpose behind everything. Eli was there to rescue that purpose, not as revenge, but as a necessity for justice. "I didn't come here to destroy what you built, Cole," Eli continued. "But I also can't allow this to continue the way it is. I'm the foundation's trustee now, and the building's social commitment clause can't be ignored. Not by you, not by anyone." Eli's revelation wasn't just a surprise for Cole. It was a blow to his perception of power and control. He realized finally that what he considered to be his empire was actually just an ephemeral construction, made of glass and illusions. His mother's foundation, the history he had neglected, was now before him, demanding its price. His mother's legacy wasn't just a noble cause. It was a responsibility, a weight he should carry. "I'm not going to destroy your company, Cole," Eli said once again with a firm and decided voice. "But you have to understand, the dignity of others can't be treated as something disposable, not when a lifetime's legacy is at stake." The room environment seemed even more charged after Eli made his statement. Cole Harrington was in shock, his hands now completely sweaty. He stared at the man in front of him, trying to process everything that was happening. Eli's words reverberated in his mind. and a feeling of disorientation began to take hold of him. Eli's imposing figure, who before seemed to be just any homeless man, now represented something much bigger. He was no longer just a street man. He was part of his history, of something Cole could no longer ignore. "I didn't know," Cole murmured, more to himself than to Eli. He was trying to justify himself, but his words sounded empty even to him. He didn't know Eli had been part of the foundation, nor did he know that somehow he was connected to what his mother had created. But as Eli spoke, Cole began to see everything from a different perspective, as if a fog were slowly dissipating. "It's understandable that you didn't know, Cole," Eli responded, his voice calm, almost paternal. "You've always been so immersed in your own reality that you never bothered to look back, but history is here before you, and you can no longer lock it in dusty archives of the past." Cole didn't know how to react. He was completely lost, as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. Eli wasn't just a symbol of social injustice, but also a direct thread to his mother's legacy, to something he had forgotten or chosen to ignore. His mind was racing 1,000 miles per hour. He had always known his mother's foundation had been created with a noble purpose, but he never really understood what that meant. Now, he saw the true responsibility that had been passed to him. His mother's weight was on his shoulders. "I knew you wouldn't understand immediately," Eli continued as if he had read Cole's thoughts. "But you will understand, and that's what needs to happen, because what you didn't realize, Cole, is that your arrogance and indifference began to transform something good into something empty." Silence hung in the room as Eli's words echoed in everyone's minds. Cole felt a growing pressure in his chest. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to Eli. The revelations were too profound to be processed in a few minutes. The man he had ignored so easily was now revealing the key to a secret he never imagined had so much power. Eli wasn't just any man. He was the guardian of something Cole never valued, the real mission of his mother's foundation. "Eli," Cole began, his voice tense, still trying to understand everything. "What do you want from me? What do you expect me to do now?" Eli looked at him, his eyes without anger, just a deep calm, as if facing someone who, though lost, could still be redeemed. "I don't expect anything from you, Cole," he said, "but you have a choice to make now. You can continue on the path you chose, ignoring your mother's legacy, or you can finally take control of what she left. Not for the world, but for yourself, for what you truly represent." The tension was palpable. Cole felt he was at a breaking point. What Eli was asking of him wasn't just a simple act of philanthropy. What he was demanding was an internal transformation, something he never thought he would need. It wasn't just a matter of business or image. It was about what he wanted to be as a human being, as someone who carries a legacy. His mother's shadow, with her mission of social justice, was now demanding its price. "Do you think it's simple for me to do this?" Cole finally managed to say, his voice choked. "I'm not like her, Eli. I'm not like her." Eli didn't move, didn't rush to give an answer. He just looked deeply into Cole's eyes, as if waiting for him to find the answer within himself. The silence extended, but instead of being uncomfortable, it was a silence of revelation. It was as if time itself had stopped, allowing Cole to look within himself and finally question who he really was. "I know you're not like her," Eli said finally, "but you can become someone better. If you want to. It's not about being like your mother, Cole. It's about finding humanity in yourself. True leadership comes from empathy, not power. You think you have power because you control a company, but true power is when you control your own actions, your choices, when you start acting according to the values you believe are right." These words hit Cole like lightning. He had never thought about power that way. He always believed power came from his wealth, his influence, his control over others. But now he was being challenged to understand that true power didn't come from any of that. True power was something deeper, something he had neglected for too long. The silence continued for a few more minutes while Cole tried to organize his thoughts. He was lost, but also felt a spark of clarity in his mind. The truth was being revealed, and he could no longer run from it. Eli wasn't there to destroy his life, but to help him find the right path. He was offering a chance for Cole to do the right thing. "I won't tell you what to do, Cole," Eli said, breaking the silence once more. "But what I can tell you is that you have an opportunity now, an opportunity to finally do the right thing." The room was quiet, everyone watching the interaction. Cole was there, on the brink of a crucial choice. He knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. He had the chance to change his trajectory, to embrace his mother's legacy and bring something of real impact to the world. Or he could continue with his life, ignoring everything being revealed. The choice was his. Time seemed to stagnate inside the room. Cole Harrington was deeply immersed in his thoughts, feeling the weight of everything that was happening. The confrontation with Eli, his mother's words, and what he had ignored for so long, all of this was finally beginning to fit into his understanding. The turning point wouldn't happen all at once, but was about to be unleashed. Cole felt an internal transformation, like a crack at the bottom of a wall, slowly widening until it was no longer possible to ignore it. Eli wasn't there just to collect a moral debt, nor to demand Cole play hero. Eli was there to challenge Cole to reconnect with what really mattered, with what he deep down knew to be right. And Cole knew this. There was a profound truth in Eli's words, a truth he could no longer avoid. "I understand," Cole said, his voice now calmer but full of internal tension. He was still in the process of acceptance, but something inside him, something fundamental, was beginning to align. He looked at Eli, and for a moment, saw not just the man he had despised, but someone who represented everything he had lost sight of. Eli was the reflection of what he had lost track of. Empathy, compassion, true leadership that isn't based on control, but on responsibility. "You've given me a lot to think about," Cole continued, now with a sincerity that was almost palpable. I always thought what I did, what I built, was enough. But it's not just about what you have or what you control. I lost sight of the true purpose, the true legacy." Eli smiled slightly, a smile not of victory, but of understanding. "And you're not alone, Cole. All of us at some point let ourselves be carried away by the illusion of power, by the temptation of control. But true strength. Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next ones. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the choices made by the characters? Do you agree with how things unfolded, or would you have done something different? Drop your opinion in the comments below,